In this next episode of our Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus series, I discover why hearts around the world have been returning to Jerusalem, fulfilling biblical prophecy in modern times. Throughout this series, we have explored Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus. And we have seen this city's landscape change drastically and even violently in the name of Jesus. But now, I want to invite you to a more hopeful time in Jerusalem's history. I invite you to explore modern Jerusalem. This incredibly prophetic time when once again followers of Jesus around the world are seeing the evils of replacement theology more than ever before. A time when Christians are again recognizing God's eternal plan for this city and His desire for the Jewish people to return to the land He promised. So let's explore modern Zionism, the return of the Jewish people to their land and to their beloved Jerusalem. And together, let's discover our role as followers of Jesus as we return to the Jewish roots of our faith and take our place as watchmen on Jerusalem's walls, anticipating the day when Jerusalem becomes what she is destined to be once again, a praise in all of the earth. There's no place on earth more important to the Jewish people than Zion. In the Bible, Zion is another name for Jerusalem, or more specifically, the Temple Mount. The term is mentioned over 150 times in the Hebrew Bible, and Jerusalem is mentioned almost 700 times. Even after the Jewish people were mostly uprooted from their ancient homeland over 2,000 years ago, they continued to face Jerusalem when they prayed, longing for the day when God would restore them to their homeland. Something that is promised multiple times in the Bible. In modern times, the term Zionism implies the return of the Jewish people, not just to Jerusalem, but to all the land God promised them. Talk to us now about modern Zionism. Just give us a little bit of an overview, first of all.
So Zionism, traditionally the Jewish connection to the land of Israel goes back to Abraham.
Right.
God says to your descendants, I give you this land. So we always say Judaism is really God, the Torah, and the land of Israel is what makes up the heart of what Judaism is about. But with the birth of modern nationalist movements, which is very much in the 19th century is when it really becomes a very big theme in European culture. Even countries like Italy and Germany finally get their act together and become unified states. At the end of the 19th century, people don't realize how late they became countries. Jewish nationalism will also take off. Many Jews who were often no longer observant Jews, who realized that any attempt to be assimilated into enlightened Europe is not going to work. The anti-Semitism always seems to follow the Jews, whether we're like the non-Jews or very different from them. As a matter of fact, it often gets worse when we get more like them, which is kind of counterintuitive and supernatural, since the reason for most hatred is dislike of the different. Okay, in the case of Judaism, it doesn't work that way. So a lot of these secular European Jewish intellectuals will decide that, the solution to the Jewish question, which is why we're always being hounded and persecuted everywhere, is a Jewish state.
Mm-hmm. So who were some of the key players, both Jewish and Gentile, that sort of brought this about?
So like Leon Pinsker is credited with being the first Zionist. He wrote a pamphlet in the late 19th century, 1882, I believe, called Auto-Emancipation. You got to free yourself. But you have any number of people, Max Nordau, there's so many different leaders. Mostly they're Eastern European Jews who came from more traditional background. The one exception to that rule, who's a little bit later, like a decade after, is Theodor Herzl. Herzl is a Hungarian Jew living in Vienna, working as a journalist and a playwright. But Herzl was the guy who rises from the top after witnessing the Dreyfus trial in 1884 in France, where a Jewish officer who's completely innocent, this is 100 years after Jews had finally gotten civil rights, is charged with treason, spying for Germany, and publicly court-martialed with the crowd screaming, "Death to the Jews." 100 years after emancipation, and Herzl is completely assimilated, says, what? In France, 100 years after emancipation? He joins the movement, he rises to the top, and he's the one who will, a couple of years later, make the first Zionist conference. It's going to be, they want it to be in Vienna, it ends up being in Basel, Switzerland.
Right.
He writes a book called the Judenstaat, which is the Jewish state, and he will be the person who will really get the momentum going to create what is a modern political movement.
Now, why do you think Christians today are starting to see the significance of Zionism and, in some ways even becoming Zionists themselves?
It's the first group of Christians to actually take the book seriously. If you know your history of the Bible, the #1 book on the Catholic Church's index of banned books was the Bible, because anyone reading the Bible, which was of course unreadable because almost everyone in Europe was illiterate, and then it was only in Latin, anyone reading the Bible would see the hypocrisy between the actual behavior of the church versus what's being preached in the book. We'd see the disconnect is so great. So once people start to read, and literacy, it's a perfect storm of the printing press coming out pretty much at the same time as the Protestant Reformation, the reintroduction with Wycliffe and Tyndale and all these things that are happening in England and in Europe and Germany. It all comes together to reintroduce the Bible. The rate of literacy explodes, and with the reintroduction of the Bible, people start taking the book actually seriously finally, and that's naturally going to lead to an interest in prophecy, and it's going to bring out a lot more support and interest in what's going on, seeing what's happening in the Jewish people's world, this fulfillment. You look at the book and you look what's going on, and wow, there's an incredible convergence of the two, which only accelerates and moves closer and closer together as we're in the period of time now. We're like a few headlines away from total convergence of biblical end of days scenario, what we read in the Bible. It's right there. So anyone who's reading it, whether it's in Hebrew or even in translation, can see that clearly there's someone behind the scenes pulling all the strings and making it work. There's actually a whole museum in Jerusalem called FOZ, Friends of Zion, and the Christian support for Zionism goes back to the beginning of Zionism. And there are actually some Christian leaders who were into Zionism before Jews were into Zionism. Some of it comes out of a biblical connection, some of it comes out of sympathy for the Jewish people, some of it comes out of a combination of both. But there have been some very notable personalities who have very much supported creation of a Jewish state, even big political leaders like a person like Winston Churchill.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The nation of Israel and the Jewish people have just suffered horrendous attacks not seen since World War II. However, Israel and the Jewish people are not alone. First Century Foundations has been actively supporting the people of Israel for nearly 40 years, providing food, clothing, and shelter for those in need, especially in these desperate times. When you give a gift of $30 or more, you are not only helping support the people of Israel, you are also showing that you care and are blessing God's chosen people in their hour of need. And when you give your gift, as a thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newsletter and Israel Prayer Watch. And for monthly donations, we will send you the book, Praying for the Peace of Jerusalem. Call now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit us online at firstcenturyfoundations.com and help the people of Israel during these dangerous times.
There are many prophecies in the Bible that speak about the return of the people of Israel to the land God promised them, something God said would take place with the help of other nations. And just like God's word to the prophet Ezekiel, it was when the people of Israel were almost completely devoid of any hope that the dry bones of Israel began to come alive, and a powerful nation was born. To learn a little more about this transformation and the role some nations played in this process, Isaac took me to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. This is a very special place. Tell our friends at home where you've brought me today.
So today, Jeff, we are at Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the biggest and the most important Holocaust museum that we have in Israel and here in Jerusalem. And actually over here we can see the main avenue of Yad Vashem, the avenue of the righteous among the nations.
Yes.
This avenue begins over there at the main entrance to Yad Vashem, and it goes all the way to the other end of this complex.
Amazing. Now, Avenue of the Righteous. These are Gentiles who assisted Jews in many different ways during a very, very troubled time in history, during the Holocaust.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. When we say righteous among the nations, we mean to say very, very good people, not Jewish people, Christians, that during the time of the Second World War, they worked very, very hard in order to save Jews from the hands of the Nazis. Now, by saving Jews from the hands of the Nazis, they risked their lives and they risked the lives of their families. Many of them paid, many others still pay, very heavy dear price for saving the Jews from the hands of the Nazis.
Right.
But nowadays, when you look backwards on our history, we can definitely say that thanks to these righteous among the nations, today we have thousands and even tens of thousands of Jews who are still alive.
Yes. And many of them, as you said, paid a heavy price. Some of them paid the ultimate price. Some of them lost their lives
Exactly.
in doing this.
In doing this.
Yeah. So they're all along here, these beautiful trees. Every one of them has a plaque on the bottom. Explain that to us.
So, when Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum was opened to the visitors in 1957, since then Israel began and then succeeded to find many of these righteous among the nations. When Israel found them, Israel brought them all the way here to Jerusalem in order to thank them. So when we brought them to Jerusalem, we did a few things. Number one, we gave each and every one of them the title of righteous among the nation.
Yes.
Number two, Israel gave each and every one of them, those who were alive, Israeli citizenship. Israel began to pay them pension for the rest of their lives. And we also planted these trees that you see here and named the trees after the righteous among the nations. This is why near every tree you can see the sign that tells you the name of the righteous among the nation and the country from where he or she came from. Now, Jeff, my dear friend, every tree that you see here is another amazing, dramatic story. See how many trees we have along this avenue. So thanks to all of these trees that you see here, nowadays, as we said, we have tens of thousands of Jews who are still alive.
Right.
Now, what we see here is something symbolic. Most of the trees that we see here in the avenue, these are the carob trees, also known as St. John trees. A carob is a very strong tree, very healthy tree, and it has long, long life. And this is what we wish the righteous among the nations. Nowadays, many of them are not youngsters anymore. Many of them are in their late 80s, early 90s. So we wish them to be strong and healthy like the carob tree. Please, let's carry on. And while we are here, there is another point that we need to emphasize. Remember that earlier we talked about Herzl and his vision and all of that. But please remember that until the time of the Second World War, no one didn't think to allow the Jews, to allow them to establish a state of their own. Now, during the time of the Second World War, we are talking about 6 million Jewish victims. 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis. So this was one of the main reasons why later on, in the 29th of November 1947, United Nations made a very important decision and declaration that allowed the Jewish people to establish the state of Israel. So today, when we look backwards on our history, we can definitely say that one of the reasons why UN in the 29th of November 1947 made this very important decision was the Holocaust. Because in 1947, United Nations said the Jews suffered a lot. They paid very heavy price, 6 million victims. So now they said is the time to allow them to establish the new state of Israel. So you see what a very heavy price Jewish people had to pay for the right to establish the new state of Israel.
Yes, very heavy price. Thank you, Isaac.
You're welcome. Let's continue, please.
Don't go away. When we come back, I visit Mount Herzl and learn more about Bible prophecy coming to pass in the land of Israel. I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I had been totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Futers, Director of First Century Foundations, and I am excited to invite you on my journey to the foundations of our faith, to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel and the Jewish roots of our faith. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel's history, we help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 incredible ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, we'll explore Israel's significant past while doing our part to ensure that Israel has a bright future. It was sobering and yet so inspiring to explore the avenue of the righteous among the nations and see the names of those Gentiles who risked their lives to protect the Jewish people. Israel paid such a high price to become a nation, and even after becoming a nation, they continued to pay a high price to defend the only tiny piece of our planet they have ever truly called home. So in 1948, Israel is reborn in a day. And then, there's a huge fight to sort of establish control of this new state. But when all the dust settles, Jerusalem is not in Jewish hands. Why is what happens in 1967 so important for the Jewish people?
So, the original impetus, the European impetus to create a Jewish state begins with the end of World War I, really, and different programs and plans. What happens, without going to the whole story, is initially Israel was supposed to be huge, 3 times the size of what it is today, even with those territories that are disputed. By the time we get to Eve of 1948, the British have taken the remaining 25%, which in violation of the agreements they signed internationally, created Transjordan or whatever, and wanted to subdivide that. So the Jews would end up with 15% of that. It was basically an impossible little pieces of, little territory. The Jewish population accepted it, the Arabs rejected it. So when the British finally pull out on May 14, 1940, Israel declares itself a state, 6 Arab armies declare war and invade. We should have lost that war. It was 45 million Arabs against 600,000 Jews. It's Israel's longest war, over a year. 1% of the population is killed. As a consequence of that, East Jerusalem, which includes the Old City, is lost to the Jordanian Legion, which will itself illegally occupy a huge chunk of real estate, which wasn't supposed to be part of Jordan. They're on the other side of the Jordan River for 19 years. And Egypt will take the Gaza Strip. Neither of those, according to any international agreements, even the latter ones, are supposed to be part of those 2 countries. In 1967, this time only 3 Arab armies tried to destroy Israel. It's Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. And in 6 days, what is arguably one of the most miraculous victories in human history, Israel would triple its territory and completely destroy 3 Arab armies. And for the first time in 2,000 years, since the Roman destruction of Jerusalem, and even then we didn't have sovereignty over Israel, we were a puppet state. But the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem is in the hands of the Jewish people. The Temple Mount is in the hands of the Jewish people. And we have a unified state now with everything that's within the biblical boundaries, more or less, are now more or less back within the hands of the Jewish people. Most importantly, the biblical heartland, which is ironically what's called the West Bank. I never used that term because they say from the river to the sea, which is from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, Palestine will be free. But that piece of real estate looks like a giant figure 8, which included Jerusalem and everything north and south. That is, if you take a Bible and you read where all the stories are taking place, it's not in Tel Aviv.
Right.
It's in Hebron. It's in Samaria. You know, it's in these places that, and so that is finally back. And that, by the way, gives impetus to the birth of what's called the Gush Emunim. Gush is a cluster of believers. The settlement movement is a religious messianic movement that is all about, now that God has given us this miracle. 48 was a miracle. We're going to have, in a few days, Yom Yerushalayim coming up, Jerusalem Day. That's an even bigger miracle. Clearly, the process is moving towards its final culmination. We're just missing the Messiah and the temple being rebuilt, so it leads to the settler movement, but it gives, amongst the Christian population, worldwide, they're seeing it, yet another thing you could check off. That shouldn't have happened, Jews shouldn't be here, but they're back. This Jewish state is reborn. In the ashes of the Holocaust, one of every 3 Jews is murdered and survives a 1-year-long war against 45 million Arabs when they had no weapons.
Yeah.
State of Israel prospers, God says it, you'll shoot forth your branches and bear your fruit by people, your return is close at hand. That's what Ezekiel says, behold, I will return to you and you'll be tilled and sown, I'll multiply men upon you, the entire family of Israel. Look, it's all coming true.
Yeah.
Jerusalem reunited, land blooming, Jews coming back. In 1900, 0.5% of the Jews in the world live in Israel. Today, at least 50% of the Jews in the world live in Israel.
Yeah.
That's a 1,100% increase. So people reading the Bible, whether they're Jewish or not, as a matter of fact, I think more numerically, obviously, there's a lot more non-Jews, but percentage-wise, I think a lot more Christians reading the Bible see the messianic side of it than a lot of secular Jews see it.
Right. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The nation of Israel and the Jewish people have just suffered horrendous attacks not seen since World War II. However, Israel and the Jewish people are not alone. First Century Foundations has been actively supporting the people of Israel for nearly 40 years, providing food, clothing, and shelter for those in need, especially in these desperate times. When you give a gift of $30 or more, you are not only helping support the people of Israel, you are also showing that you care and are blessing God's chosen people in their hour of need. And when you give your gift, as a thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newsletter and Israel Prayer Watch. And for monthly donations, we will send you the book, Praying for the Peace of Jerusalem. Call now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit us online at firstcenturyfoundations.com and help the people of Israel during these dangerous times.
It is mind-blowing how much Bible prophecy has been fulfilled in modern times just by Israel becoming a nation once again. Yet this miracle did not occur without a tremendous amount of sacrifice. To learn more about this, Isaac took me to Mount Herzl, where Theodor Herzl is buried, along with many others who fought to defend the prophetic Zionist dream. Now, Isaac, we talked about the miracle of the birth of Israel in only one day, but it was not a decision made lightly. And we are standing in a very sad and somber, but also a very special place. Explain to us what we're looking at today.
Absolutely. Over here, you said it right. This is a very sad place. This is the military cemetery that we have here on Mount Herzl, Jerusalem. Jeff, my friend, sadly, in every city, every town, every village in Israel, we have similar military cemeteries. So this is the military cemetery of Jerusalem. Over here, we can see the graves of people that lived in Jerusalem, served in the Israeli army, and got killed in all of the wars that we had since 1948. So here specifically, all of the graves that you see here, the graves of people, I repeat, citizens of the city, got killed in all of the wars. This is very sad. Why? Because this shows what was the price that we had to pay since 1948 for the privilege to live here. It shows what is the price that we still continue to pay, sadly, almost every day, for the privilege to live here. And sadly, what will be the price that we will have to continue and to pay for the privilege to live here in Jerusalem and in Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very complicated situation.
Yes.
Not so complicated if you think about it simply. You know, you are defending yourselves against acts of terror from points without. And I think that it's important for people to know this is not a political statement. This is about a land and a people who just want to live and be left alone. And
Exactly.
unfortunately, in order for you to do that, from the very day that independence was declared, the following day, this began.
And you see the price.
And it continues. And it's a horrible price for you to have to pay. But we honor and deeply respect those who have served and continue to serve, and ultimately those who have given their lives and paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Maybe I can ask one thing from our people. Please pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and may those who love you be secure. This is something that we as an organization, as a ministry, are constantly talking about, constantly encouraging, especially Christian believers, to engage in. And I would encourage anybody who's watching to do exactly what Isaac has said. Let's pray together for the peace of this nation and for God's purposes to be fulfilled. It has been so meaningful exploring Jerusalem in modern times, to see how God has remained faithful to his people despite their long and difficult exile, to learn how Christians around the world have started to return to the Jewish roots of their faith and see the importance of Jerusalem, much like Jesus and his earliest followers did. The reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was a miracle of biblical proportions. But its rebirth has not been without tremendous suffering and loss. As we conclude our series, Exploring Jerusalem from Genesis to Jesus, I invite you as a follower of Jesus today to take your place and to be on guard for Jerusalem, to stand with the Jewish people and Israel, and to be an active watchman on her walls. And the best way we can do this as Christians today is to support Israel's right to live in Jerusalem and the land God promised her, and most of all, to obey God's command to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And as followers of Jesus around the world begin to turn their faces back toward this holy city with the love and compassion that Jesus felt for this place, as we simply agree with God's divine will for this city, together we will be part of something truly amazing. We will see God himself transform this city into the praise of the earth Jerusalem is destined to be.